we need to talk about what's happening with Chuck Schumer, because what I'm about to lay out for you isn't just about one senator's political problems. This is about a Democratic Party in crisis, a leadership vacuum at the worst possible moment, and a train wreck that's been building for months that finally came to a head this weekend. Let me start with the headline. On Sunday night, 8 Democratic senators defected. They joined Republicans to advance a deal to end the 40-day government shutdown, the longest shutdown in American history, and they did it despite Chuck Schumer's public opposition. 8 senators from his own caucus. That's not a minor revolt. That's a categorical failure of leadership. But here's where it gets interesting and frankly infuriating, because according to reporting that came out just hours after that vote, those 8 senators weren't rogue actors. They weren't freelancing. They were acting with Schumer's express approval. They were reporting to him daily. Read that again. Chuck Schumer privately blessed this deal, orchestrated the votes, and then at the last second voted no himself to provide himself political cover while letting retiring Democratic senators take the heat. If that doesn't make your blood boil, you're not paying attention. This is the kind of inside the beltway maneuvering that makes Americans despise Washington. It's theatrical resistance. It's performative opposition. And the American people can smell it from a mile away. Now, let's talk about what was actually in this deal, because this matters. The central issue, the reason Democrats were supposedly holding the line, was the expiration of Enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies. These subsidies are set to expire on January 1st, and when they do, health insurance premiums are going to skyrocket. We're not talking about a modest increase. According to analysis from the Kaiser Family Foundation, premiums will more than double for the average subsidized enrollee. That's a 114% increase, from $888 a year to $1,904. Think about what that means for real people. For families already struggling with inflation, with rent, with putting food on the table, suddenly their health insurance costs are going to double. And for people earning just above 400% of the federal poverty level, we're talking about middle-class families here, they're going to lose their subsidies entirely, completely. 1 in 10 enrollees in ACA marketplace plans will go from getting help to getting nothing. The Congressional Budget Office estimates 4 million people will become uninsured if these subsidies expire. 4 million Americans. And what did Democrats get in this deal that passed on Sunday? A promise. A vague promise from Republicans to hold a vote on the subsidies by mid-December. Not a guarantee they'll extend them, not even a commitment to bring a clean bill, just a promise to hold a vote. That's what Schumer's carefully orchestrated defection secured, a promise. In poker terms, Democrats folded a full House for the prospect of drawing to an inside straight. Now, the reaction from within the Democratic Party has been swift and it has been brutal. Congressman Ro Khanna from California didn't mince words. He said, and I quote, "Senator Schumer is no longer effective and should be replaced. If you can't lead the fight to stop healthcare premiums from skyrocketing for Americans, what will you fight for?" End quote. Congressman Seth Moulton from Massachusetts, who's eyeing a Senate run himself, called this another example of why we need new leadership. He said if Schumer were an effective leader, he would have united his caucus to vote no and hold the line on health care. And then there's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. AOC has been increasingly vocal about Democratic leadership's failure to mount effective resistance to Donald Trump. She said holding the line wasn't about appealing to a political base, it was about protecting people's lives. She emphasized that working Americans want leaders whose word carries weight and meaning. That last part is crucial because it gets at something deeper than just this one vote. There's a growing sense among Democratic voters, and the polling backs this up, that their leaders are weak, that they're afraid, that they're more interested in preserving the norms of Washington than fighting for the people who elected them. Let me show you some numbers, because numbers don't lie. Chuck Schumer's approval rating is at 17%. 17. That's the lowest of any congressional leader, and it's his worst rating in CNN polling going back to 2017. Among Democrats, his own party, more Democrats disapprove than approve of congressional leadership for the first time in over a decade. 59% disapprove, 40% approve. In New York State, where Schumer has been a fixture of politics for decades, he's 10 points underwater. 49% view him unfavorably, 39% favorably. That's his lowest rating in 20 years of Siena College polling. And here's the kicker. Among Democrats in New York, only 52% view him favorably. His standing with liberal Democrats has fallen dramatically. The pollsters are saying something remarkable. For the first time in Siena College polling history, Schumer is underwater with a plurality of New York voters viewing him unfavorably. Think about that. This is a man who's been in the Senate since 1998, who became the Democratic leader, who represents one of the bluest states in the country, and his own constituents have turned on him. Why? Well, Sunday's vote didn't happen in a vacuum. This has been building. In March, Schumer backed a Republican-led continuing resolution, a stopgap funding bill that included no restrictions on President Trump and no guardrails on Elon Musk's efforts to dismantle federal agencies. Democrats were furious. His book tour got canceled because of security concerns. Protests were planned outside every venue. At the time, Schumer wrote an op-ed in the New York Times defending his decision. He said, quote, "As bad as passing the continuing resolution would be, I believe a government shutdown is far worse." He predicted that if the government shut down, Trump would gain unilateral control of spending and use that power to advance his priorities. Well, guess what? We now have a 40-day shutdown, the longest in American history. And all those fears Schumer articulated in March, they're coming true. Airlines are canceling flights. Federal workers have gone without pay for over a month. Food assistance programs are in legal limbo. More than 24 states are warning of catastrophic operational disruptions. The economic damage is real and it's mounting. And what did we learn from Schumer's March capitulation? That it didn't prevent this shutdown. It didn't preserve any leverage. It just taught Republicans that if they push hard enough, Chuck Schumer will fold. And he did it again on Sunday. But here's what should terrify Chuck Schumer as he lies awake at night, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because according to multiple polls, AOC would absolutely crush him in a Democratic primary. One poll from Data for Progress showed her leading him by 19 points, 55% to 36%. Another poll put her lead at 21 points. Think about that for a second. We're talking about a 74-year-old Senate minority leader who's been in office for almost 3 decades, who has all the institutional support and name recognition you could ask for, and he's losing to a 36-year-old congresswoman by double digits in his own party's primary, and it's not close in any demographic. AOC leads among black voters by 16 points, among white voters by 15 points, among Latino voters by 28 points, even among Jewish Democratic primary voters in a state with a significant Jewish population, where Schumer has been a stalwart supporter of Israel his entire career. AOC leads 45% to 33%. The polling also shows something else that should alarm Schumer. 84% of Democratic primary voters say Democrats in Washington aren't doing enough to stand up to Trump and the MAGA movement. 84%. That's not a faction. That's not the base. That's a supermajority of Democratic voters who think their leaders are failing them. And AOC knows this. She's been traveling the country with Bernie Sanders on a fighting oligarchy tour. Crowds are chanting AOC, AOC at rallies. She's hired former Bernie Sanders advisors. She's building a national operation. And sources close to her say she's seriously considering either a presidential run in 2028 or a challenge to Schumer's Senate seat. Now, some people will say, come on, she's not going to primary a sitting Senate Democratic leader. That would be too disruptive, too divisive. To which I say, did you forget what happened on Tuesday? Did you forget that Zohran Mamdani just won the New York City mayor's race? Let me tell you about Zohran Mamdani, because this story matters. Mamdani is a 34-year-old Democratic Socialist State Assembly member. A year ago, he was polling at 1% in the mayoral race, 1%. And on Tuesday, he became the first New York mayoral candidate to win over 1 million votes since the 1960s. He beat Andrew Cuomo, a former governor with massive name recognition and billionaire backing twice, first in the primary, then in the general election when Cuomo ran as an independent. And here's the most important part. Chuck Schumer refused to endorse him, despite Mamdani being the Democratic nominee, despite meeting with him multiple times. Despite being one of the most powerful Democrats in New York and in the country, Schumer wouldn't endorse his own party's nominee for mayor of the largest city in America. Do you know who did endorse Mamdani? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She was one of his earliest supporters. She campaigned with him. She was at his victory party on election night when he told Donald Trump to turn the volume up. And she called out Democrats without naming names, but we all knew who she meant for failing to support their own party's nominee. She said it complicates their ability to ask voters to support any nominee later. She was talking about Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, who only endorsed at the very last minute. This is the kind of party infighting that usually stays behind closed doors, but it's out in the open now, and it's ugly. And the thing is, Mamdani's victory is a proof of concept. It shows that a young, progressive, democratic socialist can defeat the establishment despite being vastly outspent, despite not having the institutional support, despite Donald Trump endorsing their opponent and threatening to cut off federal funding. Mamdani did what a lot of people thought was impossible. If Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is watching this, and I guarantee you she is, she's thinking, if Mamdani can do it, so can I. And she'd probably be right. Now, let's zoom out for a moment, because there's a bigger story here about what's happening to the Democratic Party. The party is having an identity crisis. There's a fundamental disagreement about strategy and tactics and what opposition to Trump should look like. On one side, you have the old guard, Schumer, Pelosi, the people who've been in leadership for decades. Their approach is institutional. They believe in norms, in procedures, in cutting deals behind closed doors. They think government shutdowns are bad politics and bad policy, so you avoid them at almost any cost. They remember when bipartisanship was possible, when you could work with the other side and get things done. On the other side, you have the progressives, the AOCs, the Mamdanis, the younger members who look at the Trump era and say the old playbook doesn't work anymore. They argue that Republican leaders don't negotiate in good faith, that every compromise is just another step toward the right, that the only way to fight is to actually fight, to use every lever of power to mobilize public opinion, to make Republicans pay a political price for their extremism. And right now, the progressive message is resonating, not just with young voters or the Twitter left, but with a broad swath of the Democratic base, because people are watching the news. They're seeing Trump appoint unqualified extremists to cabinet positions. They're seeing Elon Musk treat the federal government like his personal plaything. They're seeing Republicans try to gut health care and Social Security and Medicare. And then they look at Democratic leadership. And what do they see? Chuck Schumer cutting deals, voting for funding bills with no concessions, failing to unite his caucus, letting 8 senators defect on the most important health care vote in years. And voters are asking, what exactly are you fighting for? The answer seems to be not much, or at least not enough. And here's where it gets even more complicated, the economic stakes. This 40-day shutdown has already done serious damage. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has shut down virtually all activity. That means we're not getting critical economic data that the Federal Reserve relies on to make decisions about interest rates. That means uncertainty for markets, for businesses, for everyone trying to plan for the future. Each week of the shutdown trims about 0.1 to 0.15 percentage points off GDP growth. The economy grew at only 1.8% over the first half of 2025. We're already dealing with a weakening labor market. Inflation has been rising every month since April. And now we're adding a prolonged government shutdown to the mix. And Trump has explicitly threatened to make federal furloughs permanent, to actually fire people, not just temporarily send them home without pay. If that happens, we're talking about long-lasting economic damage. The Washington, D.C. region, which is already dealing with layoffs from Elon Musk's so-called Department of Government Efficiency, would be devastated. But Democrats don't seem to be effectively communicating any of this. They're not making Republicans pay a political price. The polls show most Americans blame Republicans for the shutdown, which is good for Democrats, but what are they doing with that advantage? They're folding. They're taking deals that give them nothing. And the healthcare piece of this, the ACA subsidies, this is personal for millions of Americans. I want you to imagine you're someone who's been paying around $500 a month for health insurance, and suddenly that bill is going to be over $1,000. Or you're someone who's been getting a subsidy and now you're going to lose it entirely because you make just slightly too much money. What are you going to do? Drop your coverage? Cut back on other necessities? There are real people behind these statistics. People like Elizabeth Wick in Texas, whose premiums are jumping from $862 a month to $1,380, and she's losing her $400 subsidy. Or Beth Keenan in Pittsburgh, whose premiums will jump from $589 to $1,065, an 81% increase because she earns too much to qualify without the enhanced subsidies. She's an early retiree trying to bridge the gap to Medicare at 65, and this could derail her entire retirement plan. Or people like patients with cancer who are on disability and part-time work, whose premiums are going from $541 to over $1,700 a month. Some of these people are going to become uninsured in the middle of cancer treatment because they can't afford the premiums. Think about that. That's what was at stake in Sunday's vote. Those are the lives that Chuck Schumer's orchestrated cave-in just put at risk, and the best he could secure was a promise of a vote, not an actual extension, not a guarantee, a promise. You know what Republicans have learned from this? They've learned that if you hold out long enough, if you create enough chaos, if you threaten the economy and people's livelihoods, Chuck Schumer will blink, and they're going to use that playbook again and again. Some Democrats are trying to defend Schumer. They're saying he was in an impossible position, that he couldn't keep the government shut down forever, that at some point you have to be the adults in the room and reopen the government. And look, there's some truth to that. Government shutdowns do hurt people. Federal workers going without paychecks, that's real suffering. But here's the problem with that argument. Schumer already tried that strategy in March. He voted for the continuing resolution then to avoid a shutdown. And what did it get him? Nothing. No leverage, no concessions. And now we have an even longer, even more damaging shutdown anyway. So the strategy of preemptive capitulation didn't work. All it did was teach Republicans that they can push Democrats around. And the thing about being the adults in the room is that it only works if there's some reciprocity, if the other side occasionally acts like adults too. But that's not the game Republicans are playing. They're perfectly happy to drive the car off the cliff and then blame Democrats for not grabbing the steering wheel. At some point, Democrats have to be willing to say, no, we're not doing this. We're not going to let you hold the economy hostage. We're not going to let you cut health care for millions of people. We're going to hold the line, and if that means a shutdown continues, that's on you, Republicans. You control the White House. You control the House. You control the Senate. This is your mess. But Schumer doesn't seem willing to do that, and that's why his own caucus is in rebellion. That's why 8 senators defected. That's why his approval ratings are in the basement. That's why AOC is leading him by 20 points in primary polls, because Democratic voters are watching and they're learning that their leaders will fold when push comes to shove. And that's a devastating message to send heading into the 2026 midterms and the 2028 presidential election. Now, I want to talk about the Mamdani situation again, because it's illustrative of a broader problem. Schumer's refusal to endorse the Democratic nominee for New York City mayor wasn't just about one race. It was a signal. It told progressive Democrats that if you win fair and square, if you win the primary, if you're the nominee, it doesn't matter. The party leadership won't have your back if you're too far to the left. And by the way, this isn't the first time Schumer has done this. 4 years ago, he did the exact same thing with India Walton in Buffalo. Walton won the Democratic primary for mayor, and Schumer refused to endorse her for weeks. He wouldn't even say whether the winner of the primary was the Democratic nominee. So there's a pattern here. And what it tells progressives is that the party is rigged against them, that even if they do everything right, even if they build coalitions and win elections, the institutional leaders will undercut them. Is it any wonder that people like AOC are thinking about primary challenges? Is it any wonder that voters are looking for new leadership? And here's the thing, Schumer's gambit isn't even working. Mamdani won despite not having Schumer's endorsement. He won by a significant margin. He became the first candidate in decades to win over 1 million votes. So Schumer burned bridges with the progressive wing of his party. And for what? His guy, or actually, he didn't endorse anyone, but the establishment candidate lost anyway. That's weak. That's what leadership failure looks like. Let me tell you what I think is really going on here. And this is speculative, but I think it's important. I think Chuck Schumer is scared. I think he's looking at the political landscape, seeing Trump's return to power, seeing the Republican Party's willingness to burn everything down, seeing his own poll numbers crater, and he's trying to thread an impossible needle. He's trying to appear tough to his base while not antagonizing Republicans too much. He's trying to avoid shutdowns while also claiming to fight for progressive priorities. He's trying to lead the resistance while also cutting deals with the people he's supposed to be resisting. And the result is that he's satisfying nobody. Republicans don't respect him because they know he'll fold. Progressives don't trust him because he keeps folding. And voters, regular Americans who just want someone to fight for their interests, they're tuning out because it all seems like theater, and maybe it is theater. Maybe Schumer's calculation is that he can survive until 2028, that AOC won't actually run against him, that the storm will pass. But I don't think that's a safe bet, because the anger I'm seeing in the Democratic base right now, it's real, it's not going away, and it's focused squarely on leadership. Every poll shows that huge majorities of Democrats think the party isn't doing enough to stand up to Trump. Every focus group shows voters frustrated with what they see as weakness and capitulation. Every election is showing that progressives can win, even without institutional support sometimes, especially without institutional support. The Democratic Party is at a crossroads. They can continue down the path of managed decline and careful triangulation and hoping Trump makes enough mistakes that voters come back to them by default. Or they can actually fight. They can take risks. They can empower their most passionate, most energetic voices, people like AOC, and trust that voters will respond to authenticity and courage.